I don't just talk about other people's stuff, I also make my own. Books in particular. To date, I have 4 books you can check out on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Kaiju Wars Part 1, Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and the short story collection Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Hop on down to the description for Amazon links to all 4 books. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and I am among the most pitiful of God's creatures, for I am a Varan fan.
After all, it's not easy when one of your favorite kaiju is the one Toho has the least interest in. After a solo movie that suffered from a tumultuous production, Varan became a child unwanted by his own parents. His blink and you'll miss it cameo in Destroy All Monsters only served to whet our appetites further, but he would be constantly dropped from other projects over the years because Toho did not consider him marketable. Despite this, he garnered one heck of a loyal following. The combination of his unique reptilian design and his physics-defying abilities drew people's interest, and scarcity only made him more intriguing. That scarcity included figures, those things which so many of us seek out for our collections, but this made us even more frustrated. Statues tended to be really expensive, the Trendmasters figures suffered from bad timing, and Bullmark figures were both really small and not film accurate. Many of us yearned for Varan to get the Bandai vinyl figure treatment that would put him in the sweet spot between detailed and affordable, but woe to those who held their breath waiting. Then came Godzilla Singular Point, and with it came Godzilla Amphibia. Now, this is very clearly just a redesign of Varan. The only thing that denotes it as a Godzilla variant are a short row of dorsal fins on the back that look so out of place that they feel like a last-minute addition. Seriously, look at this. It's like they took the normal spikes that were originally on the back, shrunk them, shifted them down behind his legs, then slapped the Godzilla fins on and called it a day. Bandai's Amphibia figure has its own issues, such as the hands being the only movable parts, or how the way they attach prevents them from laying flat on the ground.
But my own feelings about the series aside, I picked the figure up anyway because I figured this was the closest I'd ever see to a Bandai vinyl figure of Varan, and it technically isn't even Varan. Still, I figured I'd just have to settle for this. Or so I thought. Apparently, Bandai held a poll not too long ago in which fans could vote for which monsters they wanted to have made into figures. The first one to be announced was Gorosaurus, which I still haven't picked up because of how overpriced they were at G-Fest. But the second, released on Godzilla Day, was none other than Varan, and I did not hesitate to pick him up from the online store. So, was this figure worth the wait and the shipping price? Let's take a closer look.
When images of this figure first made their way online, people were simultaneously amazed that it was happening and unimpressed with the coloring. The figure was molded in vinyl of a solid ruddy brown hue with off-white for the spikes and claws, making for a visually flat appearance. Almost immediately, fan edits of the promo images began popping up that made the figure darker with gradient painting, and I can't deny that those edits do look good. Here's the thing though, the figure is technically film accurate. Just not to the original film. I was probably the first person to point out that the color scheme matches the way Varan appears in Destroy All Monsters. It's so close in fact that I have to assume it was intentional. Now yes, in all likelihood this was probably done to save money, but it's what we got. That being said, not painting the spikes on the tail or the claws on the hind feet is just lazy. The figure may be in wanting for interesting color, but it sure doesn't lack in detail. As you can see, Varan is sculpted in his quadrupedal pose. I'm sure some people were pulling for a bipedal stance or even a flying stance, but he does spend most of his solo movie on all fours, so I think this was always going to be the default posture. Varan's distinctly tiny head looks accurate, and the inside of the mouth contains an appropriate level of detail. His jowl spikes are mostly stuck to his head, but the uppermost ones stick out just enough to match what we see in the movies. Contrast that with the Amphibia figure, whose jowl spikes are all molded right to the side of his head. Personally, I prefer the original. The membranes on Varan's body are included, but obviously they're not extended, though they kinda stand out on his armpits. While the membranes on the arms and membranes on the body do not connect, the folds are sculpted in such a way that when the figure is standing neutral, the lack of connection is perfectly disguised. This is the kind of attention to detail that made Bandai the first name in kaiju figures to begin with, and I'm quite pleased with how it looks. The really impressive part is the back. Varan's pebbly back is known to have an irregular asymmetrical texturing, and that is nicely realized on the figure. From head to tail, the irregularity is maintained and it looks splendid. Just drink it all in. In contrast, the undersides contain all the folds and wrinkles you would expect. The section of the tail that rests on the ground and where the trademark is stamped is slightly flatter than the rest of the tail, but it's not so flat that it looks awful. Articulation is simple. All 4 of Varan's limbs can move, but they have their limits, thanks to the shoulders and hips. Even though the head and tail are separate pieces, they appear to be glued in place, and thus do not move as far as I can tell. Now, scale can be tricky when it comes to Bandai figures, with some feeling smaller than others depending on the model, thus meaning they don't always look good side by side. Varan appears to be on the bigger side, and thus he looks better alongside bigger vinyl figures, like these Bandai USA and Playmates figures I put him with. He also looks good opposite the amphibia figure, probably by coincidence, but I can dig it.
So the final verdict is that the figure may be lacking in terms of paint, but it more than makes up for that with detail. Besides, this is like the only Varan figure on the market you can get that looks film accurate and won't cost you an arm and a leg. So I'm willing to forgive its flaws simply because it exists. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Who knows? If this figure does well, we might see other variations, maybe even versions from other companies. Though I wouldn't necessarily count on that.
Congratulations, you reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to consider supporting us on Patreon. Of course, the other way to support us is to go to Amazon and check out our books, Operation Red Dragon, The Kaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Also check the description for links to DeviantArt and other platforms we operate. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.